Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar on baby formula shortage. Next slide. So overall for the webinar, if you could please submit your questions or comments in the chat. Your questions or comments will be visible to all participants. And so if you have particular questions that you want to direct to the medical team, please send that information to communityrelations@nemours.org. Please don't include any private health information across the chat. Next slide. So I'm delighted to bring to you the group of experts that we have listed here. So Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph is our medical editor for Kids Health and is an outstanding pediatrician in the Delaware Valley. Dr. Amy Melano is one of our outstanding dietitians in Florida. And Molly Beitman is one of our outstanding dietitians in Delaware. Next slide. None of the presenters have any disclosures. Next slide. So these are some resources that we're going to be sharing in the chat in terms of links for some suggestions for do's and don'ts around the shortage issues and what to do, and also some government links as well. So next slide. This is really an outstanding article that Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph put together, really talking about what should I do if we can't get infant formula in the stores. And the link will also be provided in the chat. Next slide. Okay, just in context, I'm sure that most everyone knows by now that in February, the FDA put forth an announcement and said that there were some cases of Coronabacter Sakazaki and Salmonella Newport. And these are somewhat rare infections, and there was a concern that there may be a link to various infant formulas, in particular Similac Advance, Alimentum, or Elecare powdered formulas. The FDA launched an investigation, and as a result of that investigation, the Abbott Sturgis plant in Michigan voluntarily shut down. Next slide. So what formula is recalled? So this is a bit detailed information that is on the FDA website. But if you look at the bottom of the can, there's first 2 digits of the product code that are 22 through 37. And the code on the container contains a K8, SH, or a Z2. And then they also identify various expiration dates. So this is exactly what they're talking about in terms of the recall. Next slide. So they are launching this investigation that's ongoing, and they've also produced a website if there's any questions or concerns from anyone that's been exposed to this. Next slide. So what happened to the formula for infants and children in the United States? The graph that's shown here is really identifying that the supply chain issues have been present for some time. So with the COVID-19 public health emergency, there's been many parts of our supply chain that's been at issue. And what you can see here is that the Sturgis plant shutting down was really an escalation of some challenges in baby formula availability. And kind of I like to think of this as 4 legs of a chair, so that there's the vast majority of infant formula in the United States is actually made by 4 manufacturers. And when the Abbott plant shut down, that really caused one of the legs of the chair to break. Next slide. Thankfully, this is now getting a significant amount of attention over the past few weeks. There has been action from the government in terms of emergency access bills, the Defense Production Act, even flying infant formula in from Europe. The American Academy of Pediatrics is involved, and the plant that was of concern is about to reopen. There will be some delay in being able to reinitiate that formula, and that's one of the things that we want to talk about today is, if there are some challenges locally with not being able to get various formulas, what would we suggest? Next slide. So one thing just to mention, the main focus of this talk will be on infant formula. When we're talking about the options in terms of how to feed babies, human breast milk is certainly something that we would advocate for when is possible. And I think, for this audience, we all understand that at times, the infant and mother pairing, sometimes breastfeeding may not be a good fit for a variety of reasons, and that's okay. But for those that may consider human breast milk, there is a human milk bank, and there's a national association that is accredited and makes sure that things are safe in this context. Next slide. So with that, I'll turn things over to Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph.
Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to be here and to share my knowledge. What I'm going to talk about is just a little bit of the do's and don'ts regarding how to navigate this formula shortage. The first thing I want to emphasize is don't panic. It's scary, it's concerning, it's worrisome, it's frustrating not to be able to find formula to feed your baby, but there are ways around it. That's what we're here for. There's tips on what you can do. So speak with your medical provider, your pediatrician, your family doctor, your nurse practitioner, whoever helps you take care of your baby. They might have samples that representatives of the formula companies had provided with them, or they may even be able to request specific types of formulas directly from the manufacturers. Ask them, is there anything special about the formula that your child is on? Does your child need a specific formula for some type of medical condition? Are there other formulas that are similar? Most babies who are on a regular formula, who don't have a special healthcare condition, can tolerate substitutions quite easily. They don't need something specific. There's many different types of formulas that they can use. So try something new based on your healthcare provider's recommendation, or even based on our wonderful dietitians are going to give some suggestions later on in the webinar. Keep in mind that it can take a few days to adjust. Sometimes the baby might not like the taste. Sometimes they might be more gassy or have some other symptoms. You can gradually mix in the new one with the old one to introduce it slowly. So consider all your resources. There are many. These are some things you may not have thought about. Besides calling your doctor or your child's doctor, you can call local hospitals, you can call your county health departments or Health Alliance. For people who are eligible for WIC, you can call the WIC office, and they are now expanding eligibility criteria, so it's worth thinking about them and talking to your doctor about them. Food banks and breast milk banks. As Dr. Franchosi mentioned before, breast milk banks are available, and what we'd like to encourage and to emphasize is that you reach out to established breast milk banks and not just find random breast milk from the community or from random people online. Most local communities have connections with established and certified breast milk banks, and those are the ones you should reach out to. Formula exchanges online, they are abounding now on social media, and it's worth looking into that. Making sure that the formula that you might receive from someone who's online or from someone in your community looks new, is not expired, hasn't been tampered with, the can isn't dented, doesn't look rusty. So you need to use common sense and judgment. Online as well, there are websites where the manufacturers sell their formula. Just keep in mind that you want to stick with well-recognized, reputable companies. Be careful not to go to third-party sellers who may not have good quality products, who may have online auction sites or online marketplaces. We don't encourage that at all. They often, besides potentially or having poor quality products, they might also increase the prices, which is called price gouging. So you have to be aware of that. Other resources you may not have thought about are women's shelters, faith-based organizations, smaller grocery stores, smaller retail stores, mom and pop independent types of stores, not the big box Walmarts or Targets. You could try the smaller local stores, pharmacies, baby supply stores. Lots of places sell formula, so you need to think a little bit outside the box. And you can always call 211 from all over the country. This is a phone number that connects you with specialists who know about the resources in your own community. Do be considerate of other families. Everyone is in the same boat. What experts are requesting is please don't hoard the formula. Buy a 10 to 14 day supply so that there's enough to tide everyone over until we get over this hump. And be careful not to make other families feel bad if they aren't breastfeeding. So I'm assuming that this audience are all on board with formula feeding. We know that breast milk is beneficial and is possible for many families, but it may not be an option for every family. And from our perspective, fed is best. Whatever works for each family, that's what they should do. Please, please, please follow the directions on the label when preparing formula. This is very, very important to keep the formula healthy and safe. Things that we do not want you to do when trying to figure out how to make your formula last. Do not dilute the formula with water. It might be tempting because that'll give you more bottles per can than you would have had otherwise, but it's quite dangerous. It means there's a lot more water than actual nutrients. And we've seen babies get very sick. They don't have enough sodium, they don't have enough salt. They get what's called water intoxication. It's a water overload and it can be very, very dangerous. So don't dilute it with formula and don't make formula at home. There are lots of recipes online, all over social media. We know that in the distant past, in the mid 20th century, people were making their own formulas, but we discovered that it was very, very dangerous. For the same reasons as diluting formula with water, formula is made with very specific ratios of the nutrients to the water. And when you start tampering with it and making your own formula at home, following recipes that you find online, they aren't the right amounts of minerals, of vitamins, of proteins, and it can be very dangerous for the baby. And it can also lead to contamination and infections because not everyone's kitchen is perfectly clean. As I said, look at the can, make sure the formula is not past its date or expired. And we recommend not giving formula that has been sold or bought from overseas. Up until now, it has not been FDA approved, so we don't know what kind of stringent regulations it went through in its country of origin. We don't know what kind of transport process it went through. We don't know if it's been recalled or not. But fortunately, the government and the FDA are now involved in trying to make things happen so that we can import formulas from overseas, and it's happening right now as we speak. So hopefully we will be able to increase our supplies using imported formulas in the very near future. And don't give milk substitutes such as goat milk or plant-based milks. And when I say plant-based, I'm talking about milks like almond milk, rice milk, coconut milk, or oat milk under a year of age. Again, they don't have the right nutrients for infants. And I will get into specifics of what you can give in a minute. I just want to talk about not wasting the formula that you have. What you can do is you can mix a batch of formula, a big batch that you can leave up to 24 hours in the refrigerator, and then give smaller volumes for each feed. You can always pour more into the bottle if you need it, but you can try to not waste the formula by putting too much in the bottle and then needing to throw it out, because what we don't want you to do is keep leftovers from a feeding. We don't want you to freeze the prepared formula, and we don't want you to feed baby formula that has been left at room temperature for more than 2 hours. So let's talk about special circumstances during this shortage. The guidelines I'm going to introduce now have been established by the American Academy of Pediatrics just for this shortage, for this emergency period. Cow's milk, whole cow's milk, full fat, is usually introduced at 1 year of age, at 12 months. But during the shortage, most babies who are on regular formulas, not special formulas for special medical conditions, but regular formulas, can start drinking some whole cow's milk from 6 months of age for a short time. We recommend no longer than a week and not more than 24 ounces per day. Again, hopefully just to get over this hump until they can get back to the formula that they're used to. Just keep in mind that cow's milk doesn't contain enough iron. So when they are drinking cow's milk, they should get iron either in the form of iron supplements or iron-containing solids. So that's something you should talk with your baby's doctor about. Soy milk, also usually only introduced at 12 months of age. But again, during the shortage, you can give it to babies a little bit before their first birthday. Again, for short periods of time, just during the shortage, and not in large amounts. Make sure that the soy milk is unsweetened and that it's fortified with calcium and vitamin D. Toddler formula, or toddler drinks, toddler beverages, are not actually needed by toddlers. They're not a requirement. Toddlers are eating solids, drinking milk, drinking soy milk, drinking water. But they can drink them if they want. Infants cannot. Toddler formulas do not have the right mix of nutrients for infants. They're also not FDA reviewed like infant formulas, so they are not safe for infants. During the shortage, again, you can give toddler formula for a couple of days, a few days, if your baby is close to a year of age. And finally, oral rehydration solutions like Pedialyte, Enfalite, or a store brand can be given for 1 to 2 days. These do not provide calories. Your baby cannot grow on oral rehydration solutions. They're really there to prevent or to treat dehydration. They have just water, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of salt. It's meant for babies who are dehydrated. But you can use very briefly, a day, a feeding, maybe 2 days at most, in conjunction with your pediatricians or your doctor's advice. Make sure that they know when you're making a substitution like this. I am going to now turn you over to Molly Beitman, one of our wonderful clinical dietitians, and she's going to go into more detail about formulas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul-Ben-Joseph, and thank you so much for having me today. This is obviously a really important issue for all of us to talk about and really be knowledgeable about how to best help our families now really all across the country, as I know there are many people from different areas than just the Delaware Valley and Florida on here today. So the first thing I really want to talk about is the fact that this situation is very difficult for everyone involved. Choosing a formula at baseline for families is overwhelming. So there are different brands, different names of formulas, packaging is different, the colors are all different, and they're all bright and shiny, looking to have you pick that one. So I can only imagine in the situation where, there's different things missing from the shelves on how difficult this can really be. So what I really want to highlight is we totally agree that this is a challenge, and we feel for our families that are dealing with really not being able to find the formulas that they need for their babies. So what my goal is in the next couple of slides is how can we simplify the process, learn what we need to learn about formula so that we can make the best choice. So we're going to look at formula types and different forms of infant formula. We're going to learn about the similarities that might exist and the differences. We're going to look at different products that we, maybe didn't know before are available to us now, with the ultimate goal of making the safe formula choice to feed our babies, and really highlighting if we're unsure of what that safe choice looks like, we need to talk to our medical providers before making a decision to know, is there a special reason why my baby is on this formula? Do they need a special formula? And what other products might be similar that I can provide in the safest way possible? If you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm also seeing in the chat a couple things about normal formulas. So a lot of times I feel like these are referred to as our normal formulas, or what we call in the medical field our standard term infant formulas. So you can see there are many different brands here, but we're really looking at, what is typical needs of a term infant. So this might have been provided to your child in the hospital, and it might have been something, that was used as a supplement, or you're feeding it completely. Typically, these formulas are iron fortified. So we know iron is a really important nutrient for our growing infants. They are milk based. So they are, not dairy free. They do typically have lactose, and they contain an intact protein. if that's kind of the term we're going to base the next couple of slides on, is what our protein looks like. And that's really what's meant by standard, that protein source. Next slide, please. And I know soy has been definitely a movement in the milk that maybe us as adults drink, and it exists in the formula world too. So soy-based formulas are also containing of iron. They are still that intact protein. It's just from a soy source instead of a dairy source. Because of that, they're naturally lower in lactose, and really just because of the way that soy reacts, this is not something that's meant for a milk protein allergy. So we want to make sure that we're being mindful of, just because it's not milk, it doesn't mean that it's okay for a milk protein allergy. So what we're looking at with these slides is all of these formulas are very comparable. So if you had an issue finding Similac soy, the next three options in that next column would be, you know, options that are very comparable for your child, as well as the store brands that are listed to the right there. Next slide, please. So now we get into kind of the very vast product guide that we have here. So I know a lot of infants are on these formulas. They're called sensitive or gentle. They're in many different bright colors. But basically, they are all looking to improve tolerance. I'm sure a lot of us have experienced when our baby might be fussy or might be gassy, and these have attributes to them that are made to combat that. Unfortunately, for our own confusion, they are not all the same. So some of them have lower lactose content. Some of them have broken down proteins. Like we said kind of in that first slide, this protein is no longer intact. So it's easy to break down. It's a little bit more tolerated. But some of them also have added probiotics. So added bacteria that is good for our gut to help us digest food or formula in the way that our body was intended. So in this scenario, I ask you to use the colors to your advantage. Luckily, this was something that I think the formula companies might have talked about, or it's a really good coincidence, is that a lot of the colors tend to guide you as to what the change is. So the purples are going to be your most close to each other. Your little like off blues, greens there are going to be your most close to each other, and your oranges are going to be the most close to each other. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's an equal swap. There might still need to be some adjustments in tolerance, and it might take time. So although this is something that we are recommending for, you know, the safest option, it might take some patience. Next slide, please. And so you'll see the purple and the blue continue. So there are just many options in this category. What I also want to highlight on this slide is you can see there's very much different shapes of products. So to the left, you have what looks like a can of powder, but about in the middle of the slide, you have what's called a ready-to-feed liquid. So looking at those options as well, does this product come in a different type of formula than I was previously using? That can be an option if we are looking to stay with the same formula if we can't find our typical powdered formulas. Next slide, please. This is the slide that I really highlight that we should start talking to our medical providers before we make a switch. So we talked about in the first slide how those formulas have an intact protein. And then we talked about in the next few slides following that those proteins were starting to get broken down, starting to look for, you know, some improvements of tolerance. This slide is really highlighting what's called a hydrolyzed infant formula. So now our proteins have gone from an intact protein to something that all of the proteins are broken apart. They're typically broken apart, not very far, but just a little bit, all of them. So one of the formulas that was part of that recall was Similac Alimentum. And there are other choices that have that buzzword, if you can see very closely when you look at the can or the product, that hypoallergenic marking. So that's going to be where we start to have milk protein allergies or malabsorptive disorders that might be appropriate for these formulas. So these are very specific. There might be a reason why your doctor wants you on one versus the other. So it's important that we check with them before we switch from one to another. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, next slide, please. Sorry. And then this formula tends to be not quite as common as our other standard infant formulas, but basically these are made specifically for infant reflux. They are a standard protein with some added rice starch so we can combat reflux. Typically, it would be okay and safe to transition to a standard infant formula and maybe talk to our doctor about looking at if we can add a rice cereal to our formula, or if there's another option like a hydrolyzed formula that would also be tolerated. Next slide, please. And then the last category that I really want to talk about is our prematurity formulas. So this is a formula that if your infant was born a bit early, they might have gone home from the hospital on one of these formulas. Unfortunately, there isn't a substitute that I can really say other than these two brands. We do know that they come in a ready-to-feed liquid or they come in a powder. So we do have that option, but really there is no other store brand or additional brand that we can use. These formulas are more calorie dense than our typical infant formulas. They have more minerals and more protein. So I would not use this as a substitute for any other formula either. It's really important that if your infant is on this formula, that you talk with your doctor before substituting so that they can determine, first off, what an alternative might be or whether it would be appropriate to transition them off of this formula if they're older. Next slide, please. And with that, I will turn it over to my dietitian colleague, Amy, who will speak to you about some other specific formulas.
Thank you, Molly. It's great to have me here today. I'm excited. Can everybody hear me echo, or is that just me?
We can hear you.
I wonder what that is. Have it going somewhere else.
You can turn your volume down on your computer.
Okay. Is that better? Yes. Okay. So I primarily work with the outpatient GI clinic here in Nemours, Orlando. And the next few formula slides that we're going to go over are prescription only based formulas that were impacted by the recall. So for some of these formulas, if your baby is on them, you need to reach out to your medical team that manages you on these formulas, as it's important to check with them and really work with them to get a substitute formula if you are running low and your formula provider is telling you that they no longer have that formula for you. Next slide, please. So EleCare, infant and toddler were affected by the recall and the plant closing. And so that was a good portion of infants with cow's milk protein intolerance or other formula or other intolerances. And so it's a tricky one because there's not something you can buy over the counter. Alpha amino, Neocate Cineo, which has some probiotic to it, so it's not quite as comparable, and Pure Amino Infant are the comparable products. But again, you want to work with your healthcare team to really determine which one's going to be safest for your baby. And as Molly had stated, sometimes there is a little bit of growing pains when you transition to different formulas, but generally your care team can help you kind of move on from that and know how to safely navigate that. Next slide, please. this is the EleCare Junior recall, like we said. Again, Alpha Amino, Neocate Junior's on here. There's also Essential Care and Equicare, which are a lesser known amino acid toddler formula. Now, all of these formulas are toddler formulas, so you wouldn't want to ask for one of these in replace for a baby formula. They're for 12 months and over. And Neocate Splash is actually a ready-made amino acid formula for toddlers that, you know, we do give and we have been using as a substitute in some of these instances. They have some different flavors, and they also have a non-flavor. If your child is not taking this by mouth, that may be a good option. But again, too, you want to really work with your care team. There are some other available options that are a little bit more specialized, but still remain amino acid, which, again, kind of going back to Molly, is the protein is not intact at all. It's a completely lab-made amino acid protein, so it doesn't have any milk protein or anything in there. Next slide, please. And then Similac PM6040, which is also a very specialized renal formula, has been involved in this recall. This is another very specific formula for the vitamin and mineral content and the protein for infants that have renal impairment. So it's really important that you don't try and substitute this yourself, that you really speak to your nephrology team and work with them to try and use a separate formula. And we've been using modulars even to kind of keep the protein and vitamin and mineral content lower. So it's not something that you can either dilute or switch over to something else without talking to somebody and making sure that they're managing all of the electrolytes with that. Next slide, please. And with this slide, I'm actually going to hand it back to Molly to take over.
Thank you so much. So I think one of the things that we know about infancy is that it doesn't live in a vacuum, and that as we have our infants dealing with, you know, maybe less than or a different formula than they're used to, they're also growing and getting older. So I think it would be a disservice to not talk about, you know, how we can utilize our growing infant almost to our advantage and utilize introducing infant foods to talk about getting an adequate source of nutrition. So it's really important if you have somebody or have an infant that's in that 4 to 6 month period 4 to 6 months of age, it's really important that you are talking to your doctor about assessing for oral feeding and readiness for solids. You can definitely start by introducing iron and protein-rich foods or baby purees that would be accommodating to the protein and iron that we're missing from that formula volume. If we're doing this, regardless of if it's during a shortage or whether it's, you know, maybe earlier than we had expected, if they are ready, you want to make sure you introduce these foods and monitor closely for food allergens. So if we are introducing foods that contain soy or dairy or any type of fruit or vegetable that might be an allergen, or if we have an allergy history in the family, that we're not introducing them all at the same time. And the same precedents would go for toddlers who do take foods by mouth as well as formula. So keeping in mind that if they're greater than 1 year old, they can transition off infant formula to whole milk or an alternative milk at the direction of their pediatrician. So sometimes I know, especially with how busy things are, we can sort of forget and miss that our child turned 1 year and that we can make this change. So with oral feeders, we can also encourage volume of well-accepted foods. We all know picky eaters exist, but we all know that we can introduce more volume of the foods that they like. We can also encourage nutrient-dense foods that can give them the adequate calories and nutrients that they need. Also looking at, if we are doing all of this introduction of new foods, making sure that we are supplementing if we need to. So if your infant is taking less than 30 ounces of formula a day, regardless of whether that's because of the shortage or because that's their intake, you should talk to your doctor about a vitamin D supplement so that they're meeting all their needs. And if we're introducing solids to accommodate, we could look at introducing a multivitamin that would also contain iron and vitamin D. And just to make sure we are all speaking with our medical providers before we're making these changes. Next slide, please. And so I think some of this information will be a repeat from Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph's slides, but if we're repeating something, I think it's because it's really important. So there is obviously a lot of information about what we can do to mitigate this formula shortage. And I think it's important that we as the medical providers talk about it so that you all have the right information. So goat's milk, I want to highlight as not an appropriate intervention, just because we don't know if it's pasteurized or not necessarily. It has a pretty low protein content and low in vitamin B, which is really important for brain development and growth during infancy. However, also as Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph had said, there are infant formulas that are being fast-tracked for FDA approval. So these are things that right now we just cannot recommend, but who knows for the future. The AAP had made a statement about introducing whole milk early or before 1 year of age with guideline. They had to be greater than 6 months of age, no more than 24 ounces a day, and no more than for 1 week duration. Homemade formula is something that we've all, I'm sure, seen going around, but it's really important that we stay away from this as much as possible. We are unable to say that this is safe in any way, shape, or form because we don't know if there is a contamination risk in the kitchen that it's being made in. We cannot say that the consistency is safe for an infant to feed, and we cannot verify its nutrient content. We cannot prove that it's enough for your baby, and we can't prove that it's too much, which is the really scary occurrence. I believe Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph had talked about formula swaps or kind of getting from a neighbor. And I think that is something that we just want to make sure that we're doing it in the safest way possible. We want to ensure that containers are unopened. We want to ensure they're not tampered with or old, and that the expiration is within date. And of course, that the lot numbers are not within that recall span, if that was an affected formula. So ultimately, all of these things we will, acknowledge as something that can be confusing to say, I will or won't do this for my child, but the ultimate goal is safety. So if you are at the point where you're, desperate to feed your child, you want to make sure you're talking to your medical team about a transition in formula brand or type and having them be monitored, because that is always going to be the safer option than one of these choices here. And I think with that is our last slide. So I would like to turn it back to Dr. Franciosi for our resources and questions and answers.
Well, I wanted to thank the presenters for an excellent information. So one of the questions and kind of grouping some of the questions have come in around various types of formulas. And so there's a question as to whether or not Holly from Europe was okay. The Happy Baby Organic, that's a great name, right? And then Enfamil NeuroPro. And so I'll direct those questions to Amy and your thoughts on some of those brands and so forth.
I think, as was kind of stated earlier, buying from overseas can be a little tricky right now, right? They are bringing in formula through our government from overseas, and I think that is the best possible that you can get. I've heard lots of stories, honestly, of people trying to buy a lot from overseas and it being taken at customs. So then you're wasting your money almost. You're just not sure how it's going to be shipped. So I would caution you on buying things from overseas. The Happy Baby Organic brand, if that's what's available in your store, is relatively a safe option, yes. And what was the last one? Oh, the Enfamil NeuroPro concentrate, right? It was a can of concentrate.
Yes.
So concentrate formula is perfectly fine to feed. You just want to make sure you are reading the label properly and mixing the water properly, because again, it goes back to that diluting it or too concentrated, and using safe water, right? Don't use your tap water, use distilled water or baby water to mix that formula to make sure that we're not adding in anything that's going to contaminate it.
Okay, thank you. And Molly, there were some questions that were brought forth about, so what do I do if I'm switching between one formula or the other? Do I just, go completely over to the other one? Do they mix them? And what should I look for? Well, let me ask you that question, then I'll ask Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph about what should I look for about intolerance.
I think it was Amy that had used the term growing pains with switching infant formula, and I think that's a really great way to describe this. It is not something that you're just going to necessarily go from one formula to the other and have the same child after a feed. It's different. It's a different formula that they're going to have to get used to in this scenario. So you definitely can mix formulas, maybe half of one, half of the other for a few feeds. And then go completely to the new formula. But know that even with some mitigation strategies like that, you might have a baby who doesn't quite know what's going on when it comes to a feed. So I would encourage, even if there is some change in symptoms or some change in maybe how well they feed, how much volume they take, really looking at multiple feeds over time before chalking it up to the formula itself.
I agree with Amy. I agree with Molly. You are the parents, you know your babies, and this is pun totally not intended, but you have to go with your gut when you're looking at your child and you want to know if you should be worried or not. Babies can be a little more gazzy. They may spit up more. They may not want to feed as much. As Molly said, give it some time. But if your baby is really not looking like their usual, if you see blood in their stools, if they throw up, if they look lethargic, if you have any concerns, you're the parent. You call the healthcare provider. And we'd rather you be safe than sorry. So it's okay in this time of concern and worry to call for reassurance. That's what healthcare providers are there for.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question about how long formula can be stored in the refrigerator. So there was a question about, that because you were talking about, potentially, making sure that you don't, use the resources that you have. So Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph?
Once you've opened formula, well, let's talk about first the can of formula that you open. You should try to use it within the month. Maybe write down the date that you've opened it just to be on the safe side. Once you've prepared the formula and you've mixed it with water, you put it in the refrigerator, it can last for 24 hours. So you just pour your bottles from that formula that's in the refrigerator. Once you've used the formula, don't give your child leftovers. And if the formula has been sitting out at room temperature for more than 2 hours, that should be tossed.
Yes.
I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you very much. Okay, so then Amy, there was a question about how to mix the formula, and is any water okay? Can you get that from the tap? Can you get that from the lake? Can you get that from the spring? The distilled factory? What is it that you'd recommend?
Generally, in infants, we don't recommend tap water unless you're going to boil it and just make sure there's nothing in there, right? No lake water or any of that. The mixing instructions do vary from product to product. Sometimes their scoop size can be different. So the amount of water and the displacement and all these kind of factors go into that. So you really do want to be looking at the at label and mixing it to the label and what it says, because they will tell you the correct way. Sometimes us as care providers do give alternate mixing, but we are the people monitoring with you on your baby's tolerance. So you want to only use a special recipe that's provided from your medical team if you are changing recipes or anything like that. And yes, distilled water is fine. Baby water is fine. Most of those bottled waters are going to be okay and better than tap water.
And I'll just add one more thing. The families that need to be extra careful about giving water that's boiled are the ones whose babies might have a higher tendency to getting infections. So this would be babies, young babies under 2 to 3 months of age, babies who are known to have a weaker immune system, or babies who are born prematurely.
Thank you. And so Molly, there was questions about introducing solids, and even baby-led weaning and so forth. Do you want to comment on some of those questions?
So I think it's really something that is not necessarily meant to be as a mitigation tool for the shortage itself. We still want to make sure that we are looking for all the appropriate readiness cues, like being able to sit up on our own, hold our head up, looking at our grip and pincer grasps. So making sure that we are all appropriate to feed. But I think really introducing, if we are introducing purees and solids, looking at iron-rich foods like our dark leafy vegetables. Even if they're pureed, they're still going to have a higher iron content. Or maybe introducing even our pureed meats first as a way to get adequate protein, which are the two main things that we miss out on when we have a decreased formula volume.
Excellent. And there were also some questions about particular things about intolerance. Sometimes when babies don't tolerate things well, they can have blood in the stools and a test that's called a lactoferrin that can indicate inflammation. And so we're happy to take those particular questions, offline. And, if you want to contact the email for particular advice and so forth, we're happy to touch base directly. When we're talking about these very specialized hypoallergenic formulas and so forth, those are more of the babies that we're actually talking about that, yeah, they may need one of these more broken down semi-elemental or even elemental formulas. So, okay. Let's see. These are excellent questions. I'm trying to go through them here. Let's see. There was a question about a hotline to report, people that are taking advantage of the system. I personally don't know of that. I don't know if on the government websites and so forth if there's something, but I think, it is something for all of us. And I can tell, by the group here that we just, want to be considerate of others. I think, from a lot of the things that we've heard, it just really just be compassionate, we're here to help as your medical team, and hopefully some of the information that we've provided this evening will provide some options and take away some of the angst about some of the issues.
Yeah, I haven't heard any hotlines about or any of that, but I would be interested if this goes longer than they're anticipating right now, if that doesn't come about, because that can lead to the scamming and things too, and people price gouging, right? If they're buying a lot and then trying to resell it for more money and taking advantage of the situation, then that could lead to, some other enforcement getting involved.
Molly, so then there's a question about approximately how many ounces at approximately the various ages of infants, and this is a very general question, and so we would say that this doesn't apply for babies that are premature. It doesn't apply for those that may be underweight, etc. But so Molly, do we have some general guidelines about that?
Yeah, so I actually think Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph had a great little chart in a baby bottle that had all of the guidelines. So this will be recorded, so this will be there for you. But really it's dependent on, is that baby already taking solids, and are they doing really well with solids and purees? Typically we're looking around that 30-ounce mark at that time, but it's really dependent on the specific infant and their growth trends.
And I think to piggyback on that, like the infant volumes, less than 6 months are much smaller, and you want to be careful to not be overfeeding and then cause maybe what you might think is a formula intolerance, but really more that the stomach volume is just not matching that. So, 2 or 3 and 1 or 2 ounces in the beginning, and then moving up to 2 to 3 and 4 to 5, and, just slow, steady increments as the baby gets older to make sure that you're not just overfeeding and not tolerating the formula.
The other thing,
really important point.
Excellent. So the other thing just to mention, because there was a question about sharing the information from this webinar, and so absolutely everything will be recorded. I'll inquire about actually translating this in Spanish. There were actually a few questions about that. That would not be me, but we'll see if someone who is skilled in that can do that. There were also some questions about, babies less than a year of age, really just taking solids, giving toddler formulas earlier. And I know these questions were addressed, but maybe Dr. Ben-Joseph, if you want to take that.
Right. So as I mentioned, toddler formula is really not necessary because after a year of age, babies, toddlers, they're starting to eat solids, they're drinking milk, they're drinking water. They really don't need any toddler formula. But we know that kids can be picky and, difficult to feed sometimes. So if you have a baby who is nearing a year of age, maybe, 11 months or 10 months, and you want to try, that's all you can find, toddler formula, or as I mentioned, soy milk, and as we mentioned, also whole cow's milk, you want to try one of those options, you can. Briefly, just now, because we're in a shortage and, it's kind of in the state of emergency, but hopefully measures are being taken now that things will change within the next, we don't know how long, weeks, we hope as soon as possible, so that this will not be a long-term need. So take these things day by day, week by week, and do it in conjunction with your healthcare providers. Let them know what you're doing, the changes you're making, and they can help guide you.
Thank you, Dr. Pearl Ben-Joseph. That was an excellent summary. So maybe just some final thoughts. So Molly, do you have any final thoughts, anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to share?
I think if I had, 2 sentences, it would be that we know that this is hard and we're doing our best. And ultimately, if you cannot feed your child, you can always call your team, your medical provider, or come to the hospital. I know that's not ideal, but if you are here, we will figure out something for you, whether it's outpatient or at the hospital.
Thank you. Amy?
Yeah, I think, I just think we're here for you. You need to lean on your medical team and let us take some of that stress off of you and answer your questions to the best of our ability. There are just a lot of factors that play in this, and I think we're all doing the best we can. And, it's sort of a judgment-free zone at this point, right? Like, let's make it work the best it can for you, your family, your children, and get everybody through this safely, right? So I think just to know that you're supported.
Thank you. That's excellent. Well, it looks like those are most of the questions from the chat. Is there anything that I haven't covered for the audience? If there's any final questions here. Okay, well, again, I just wanted to thank our presenters, and really, we are here to help you, as many people have mentioned, and we're going to get through this. I'm optimistic that things are changing in the past few weeks fairly rapidly, if there are questions or concerns, by all means, reach out, and please share this webinar. If you found this helpful, we're happy to provide the links for other families that may benefit. Okay, well, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.